very much the organisers of this conference, the Kaletsky Foundation, Fundacja Kaleckiego, for their initiative in organising this conference, for their kindness in inviting me to it, and also for you all for being here on a Saturday morning when we should all be resting. That's a first remark. The second remark is just to say how, pass on a thought that comes to my mind as I stand here in this room. It reminds me very much of the last book of one of my favourite Polish authors, Ryszard Kapuściński. I know he made up, we now know that he made up some of the stuff that he wrote, but he still wrote very beautifully, and in particular, I recall his last book, which was a series of stories, essays, which he had written from his past, and one of his early ones, in which he described a visit in Turkey to a museum. And the story ends very, very neatly. He explains how we went into a room and the caretaker or the curator of the museum pressed a switch, and then the final sentence is, "We stand in darkness surrounded by light." And I think, and in many respects, this is where we are today. It's a beautiful metaphor, of course, for the state of economics, as we do stand in darkness surrounded by light, and if only we would look, if only we would look. So that's one observation. Let me get on to the more serious topic of my presentation, third crisis in economic theory. This came about because I was invited about a year ago to participate in a panel around this topic. It was organised by someone who was a great fan of Joan Robinson, and Joan Robinson had written or had given in 1971 the Ely lecture at the American Economics Association, the Ely lecture entitled "The Second Crisis in Economic Theory." And obviously what the third crisis alludes to is are the discussions around that followed the financial crisis, and how the financial crisis reflects on the state of economic theory. And actually, in that crisis, in that discussion, I ended up reflecting on it. I read Joan Robinson's lecture, and I came to the conclusion that actually there is no crisis of economic theory due to the financial crisis. And this is, I've read a lot of the commentary that followed the crisis, a lot of the outraged blogs declaring that something is seriously wrong with economic theory because the crisis happened. And what struck me about all of them is that actually in all this discussion, no one has actually changed their mind as a result of the financial crisis. The financial crisis is actually a pretext for the way it's put in these blogs is that the financial crisis is the reason why everyone else should change their views and accept my view. And this applies right across the board from Robert Lucas, for example, who says, well, the financial crisis confirms my view, because the financial crisis is ephemeral. It will go away. And what's important is the long term, where my theory holds. So it's right in the mainstream. And it applies also to the heterodox economists who have also who have equally strongly argued that, of course, the mainstream is fatally compromised by the financial crisis. They should change their mind. Now, I said that no one has actually changed their mind as a result of the financial crisis. I actually have a confession to make. I did change my mind as a result of the financial crisis, because I remember at the time thinking that there would be no financial crisis. And of course I'm now willing to change my mind. And even as it was happening, I thought it won't last. So I do admit I have changed my mind. This has caused me to reflect, why is it that events like this happen and we don't change our views. The events become a lever for pushing forward our views more strongly. And this led me to reflect on why it is that events don't change economic theory. And my first view is that actually events cannot disprove any economic theory. It's a kind of sub-Kuhnian. Kuhn was the philosopher of science who said that science progresses because it discovers anomalies, and as these anomalies build up, so eventually a new theory emerges, which starts off another round of anomalies. And the idea that the crisis should change economic theory, I think, is a kind of sub-Kuhnian empiricism. There was an event which happened and was appeared contrary to all the predictions. Well, actually, it did. The shock that was caused was more the shock at the London School of Economics. If you recall, the whole discussion, one of the events in the discussion was that the Queen came to open a new building at the London School of Economics, and she said, you've got all these highly skilled technical economists, why didn't they foresee this crisis? Now, in fact, her observation was much more to the point than I think people realised, because the economics of the London School of Economics, like economics at Oxford, has for many years now specialised in empiricism, in econometric empiricism, inspired by Milton Friedman's view that the purpose of economic theory is to make predictions, and if you and the actual consistency of the theory, in many respects, the theory is it's the prediction that counts. And for many years now, the London School, the economics department at the London School of Economics and the one at Oxford have been systematically salami slicing all the funds that are given for research in economics, so that those funds are now heavily concentrated in Oxford and the LSE, doing this business of making, developing models, and then using those models to make predictions. So if anything was compromised, actually, I think it's this kind of approach. But I think in general, there was no crisis because events don't disprove any economic theory. And the reason for this is that theory is the prism through which we understand events, rather than the events being the prism through which we identify correct theory. So an event happens, like a financial crisis. All of us interpret it in the context of our theory. If we're good, it develops and extends our theory. I think one can find elements of both this view that the theory cannot be disproved by elements, and the notion by events, and the notion that events can disprove the theory in Joan Robinson's essay, which I will come back to later on, where she said she said that the first crisis arose from the breakdown of a theory that could not account for the level of unemployment, for the level of employment during the 1930s. Now, actually this wasn't true. The mainstream theory, the neoclassical theory, could account for it, but they accounted for it in terms of the strength of the unions, the fact that the wages were too high, and you couldn't disprove this because actually the argument was circular. How did you know that wages were too high? Because there was unemployment, there was mass unemployment. Why was there mass unemployment? Because the wages were too high. So this is, in many respects, it was a closed kind of circular argument. By the way, I should make, note that there was one exception to this idea that events don't change theories. Milton Friedman actually changed his mind. In 2004, he finally admitted that his monetarist theory was wrong. Interestingly enough, it was for reasons which were entirely consistent with his methodology. The events had disproved his theory, and he was willing to admit that he was wrong. I think that what we should take away from this is certainly a greater modesty about our theory. I don't think that theory drives economic policy. There's now, in the critical literature, a very widespread view that all the problems started when neoliberalism emerged out of Chicago and infected the poverty, infected politicians like Margaret Thatcher, Ronald Reagan, and this caused the breakdown of the so-called golden age. Now, actually, this was not quite how it happened. What actually happened was that politicians wanting a justification for their theories, for their policies, sought out theorists who could provide convenient justifications. And this is why I think if you want to understand why the financial crisis happened, it's wrong to look at neoliberal theory. It was what has to do is look at neoliberal policies, and not just the theories that were used to justify those policies, but actually the practical reasons why those policies were implemented. And this is the interesting thing, which very few people look at. Is if you look at the practical rationale for many of these policies, it was because the system of financial regulation that was associated with the Golden Age, with the post-war period, that system of regulation had broken down. It wasn't working anymore. It wasn't that deregulation came about because of neoliberal theory. There's neoliberal theory supplanted or overcame Keynesian theory. This is a version of events which I think is very flattering to academics, because it puts the academics in the seat of great influence. And I guess even Keynes might have liked this idea, because he said at the end of the general theory that it's ideas that drive practical people. No, I think it's more, but I think it may be ideas form a certain framework, but certainly in the case of the the financial crisis and the financial regulation, it was also a frustration with the failure of the policies which had been working after the war, which didn't work anymore. And we should be looking at why they didn't work anymore. The other thing about theory is that theory actually does not make predictions. The theories may determine the terms that we use in our predictions, but if I say that in a capitalist economy you have two main classes, the capitalists and the workers, or that the key components of aggregate demand are consumption and investment, and lapsed since the war, also government expenditure. I'm not making a prediction. I'm expressing the terms in which I think of the way in which the economy around us is organised and how it works. So this leads me to the question of why we need theory. And why academics argue about theory, why it's very, very important for us to have a good theory. For academics and for researchers, it's important because we need to make our thinking more consistent. And the characteristic, I think, of any good theorist is that a good theorist is always learning, and as they're learning, their theory, their understanding of the complexity of the economy is getting greater and greater. Secondly, I think we need theory in order to have a scholarly, perhaps even academic understanding of events. What actually happens in events we can read about quite easily. We can read in let's say the financial or the business press. This will tell us things that are happening out there. The meaning of those events we have to work out for ourselves. This is in many respects why reading the business press, reading the financial press, for financial economists like me, is absolutely critical, because we need to know those events. But we still need to develop our theory to understand the significance of those events. The third reason why we need a theory, in many respects this is probably the most practical application of theory, is in order to be able to identify problems. And there's no doubt in my mind that what was and what has been most fatally compromised in the financial crisis is the theory that the only problem in a capitalist economy is inflation. If you look at the development of macroeconomics from the 1970s onwards, it's the gradual abandonment of any idea that unemployment constitutes a problem, and the increasing preoccupation with inflation as a problem. And what happened in the financial crisis is that the financial crisis in the first place threw up a completely original problem, the problem of financial stability, something that was supposed only to happen in developing countries where they didn't have sophisticated financial markets. What it showed is that actually inflation is not a problem and has not been a problem for many, many years. And perhaps the biggest accusation that one could put against academic economics is that academic economics has taken so long, or mainstream economics has taken so long to realize this. What theory does, or what theory should be doing, it should be identifying problems. And if you can, this is why Minsky, for example, became very popular in the crisis, because Minsky had identified financial stability as the key factor, the key element in the business cycle, in all these problems which are now being experienced. The final reason that why we need theory is that we also need to avoid the influence of cranks, or what Keynes called monetary heretics. Cranks who may be found in the mainstream, but also outside the mainstream. And I think at this point, let me just read to you, where did I put my, glasses. I'll just read to you what Joan Robinson wrote about this. This is in her Ely lecture. A sure sign of a crisis is the prevalence of cranks. It is characteristic of a crisis in theory that cranks get a hearing from the public which orthodoxy is failing to satisfy. From the public which orthodoxy is failing to satisfy. In the 30s we had Major Douglas and social credit. It could all be done with a fountain pen, the creation of credit. And Warren and Pearson, who convinced President Roosevelt that raising the dollar price of gold would raise the price of everything else and bring the slump to an end. The cranks are to be preferred to the orthodox because they see that there is a problem. That's it's one important conclusion. And then she wrote, and then don't forget this is 1971 when she was writing. Nowadays we have plenty of cranks taking up the problems that the economists overlook. And as she writes on, then she concludes, the cranks and critics flourish because the orthodox economists have neglected the great problems that everyone else feels to be urgent and menacing. So what we have to do is bring out those problems, address the problems that are out there that mainstream economics is not addressing. What I would say is that theory must be challenged on theoretical grounds and not on empirical grounds. We can't do it on empirical grounds. As Joan Robinson did in her 1971 lecture, I would say that she also, her second crisis, I would say now, was the crisis that she believed had emerged as a result of the work of Piero Sraffa. So it was over distribution. In actual fact, what destroyed the Keynesian consensus was not any argument over distribution, but was over inflation. I just mention some final points. One is the view that has recently been expressed by Simon Wren-Lewis, who said, I think in a version of the Milton Friedman view, that it doesn't matter about the wrong theory. For example, the neoclassical synthesis. If it gives us good policy conclusions, and the neoclassical synthesis says that in a crisis we need to have fiscal stimulus, then why not accept that theory? I would say, well, that's if you can give you good policy, that's fine. But the difficulty is that wrong theory specifies problems badly, and therefore may specify policies wrongly. A good theory would identify the problems correctly within structures that may need changing for policy to work. Let me just conclude with some final words about neoclassical economics, because there was discussion about this yesterday. Neoclassical economics, I think, is more complex than is sometimes imagined. We should remember that, for example, Oscar Lange was a neoclassical. Oscar Lange genuinely believed that if you sorted through all the inconsistencies in neoclassical thinking, the neoclassical economists would eventually achieve enlightenment and become Marxists. There are a number of other economists. Langer, for example, collaborated with a Russian or former Russian economist, Jacob Marshak, who was very helpful to Kaletsky when Kaletsky was looking for work in the 1930s. Marshak is, in the mainstream, if you mention the name Marshak, he's like a god. He succeeded Oscar Langer as being a great proponent of econometrics. He and Oscar Langer collaborated on a critique of Keynes's views on econometrics. What's sometimes forgotten is that Marshak was also a radical. He had been a left Menshevik in the Russian Revolution. I have at home Marshak's copy of Rosa Luxemburg's The Accumulation of Capital with Marshak's annotations in it. Something that really you don't expect to find in someone who ended up as a very distinguished professor of economics at Columbia University, and who, if he hadn't died, would quite possibly have won the Nobel Prize. So let's remember that there are neoclassical economics is more complex, and then let's also remember that the progress of our ideas and is taken forward not just by discussion with people with whom we agree, but by discussion with people with whom we disagree. And I say that this is a very heartfelt plea, because I come from a school, from SOAS, where everyone envies me. They say, oh, it must be so wonderful being in this radical school. It's a radical school that mostly talks to itself, and whose influence is diminished because it will not engage with people outside, and even with people in the mainstream. So let's go along the way that Langer and Kaletsky did. Let's talk to everyone, and not just those who agree